Let's bring him in.
What's up, guys?
Hey, how you doing?
There he is. What's going on?
Good to see you guys.
It's great to have you.
Good to see you. I heard you've been doing space repetition to practice for interviews. So I've been doing it. It says your name is Dwarkesh Patel. You have a podcast and you interviewed somebody named Mark who owns a website called Facebook.com. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. In fact, I made an entire Anki deck just for you guys for prepping
Really?
for
No
this
way.
interview.
No way. We're honored.
That's great. How's
That is
the
correct.
book launch been going? How's the press tour? How are you doing today?
It's been going good. The people have all kinds. I have a book out called The Scaling Era, and it compiles the interviews I've been doing about AI. And people like, as you mentioned, Mark and Demis and Dario, the heads of the AI labs, but also researchers and engineers and philosophers and economists about. And it's been really interesting because AI is one of those topics where there's so many fractal questions you could ask about what is its impact going to be, how are we going to train it, how do we even think about a superintelligence. So been dealing with a lot of different kinds of questions, which has made it interesting.
It's great.
How contentious was the sort of book process? Did you know you wanted to go with Stripe? I imagine you could have had your pick of the litter in terms of like legacy publishers that promised you all sorts of things, but you happen to own, sort of your own distribution. So maybe it was just about picking the right sort of underlying partner for it.
It honestly was never a matter of picking a publisher. The main question was whether I should do a book in the first place. And so some folks at Stripe Press reached out. And if I was going to do a book, it would be with them because, as you know, their reputation precedes them. And so then it was just like deciding, do I want to do the book or not? And I think in retrospect, it was the right call. I'm really delighted with how it turned out.
I want to talk about acceleration. Are you feeling the acceleration? Like mathematically, we are not accelerating GDP yet. Although technically we are today. I think GDP ticked up just a little bit, which means we're technically accelerating. But
it must be your podcast.
Yes, hopefully, yeah, and hopefully we're responsible. But energy use is not accelerating. Even some of the benchmarks are kind of saturating. We're not seeing acceleration curves. We're seeing solid growth. But at the same time, it feels like we're on the precipice of acceleration. But what does it mean to feel the acceleration for you?
I think it's a really good question because we have these models which we think are smart, and we, as you say, we haven't seen them even automate the things which we like. When we're having a conversation, we'll be like, "Oh, the call center workers, they should be really worried," and they still have got their jobs, right? So what's going on? There's, as you know, people have been talking about what we need to make the models cheaper. When DeepSeek came out, they were like, "Oh, it's going to be Jevons paradox, and we'll be using them way more now that they're cheaper." I think the real bottleneck is just we got to make them smarter. I don't like they're already so cheap. It's like 2 cents per million tokens or something ridiculous. I think the real bottleneck for me using them more is not their price, but them being more useful, being able to take over more parts of the economy.
Yeah. Do you think that intelligence is all we need? Andre Karpathy was talking about the importance of agency. Talked to other people about maybe it's all like what makes humans effective. It's not just intelligence. It's also agency. Right. It's also coordination, friendliness, networking. Tyler Cowen's talked about like, do we even need to map the different parts of like the skill tree that humans have, like charisma, wisdom? Like underrated is like these. Like the AIs are getting more intelligent, but they're already like maxed out on wisdom, right? But do we need to think about a different taxonomy here, or do we just need to max out intelligence and everything else will come?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think you need a lot more skills. There has been this trend in AI where whenever there's a big breakthrough, we think we've automated a large part of what intelligence is. And in fact, in retrospect, it's clear that it was only a beginning. So the big example here is when Deep Blue came out and beat Kasparov at chess. People thought that this was like a big breakthrough in intelligence in general because we thought that what chess required was this general intelligence. And you might have heard this concept of AI complete problems, where if you solve this problem, then you've solved intelligence. So people said that about self-driving. The Turing test was supposed to be AI complete. We've gone through all of these subcomponents of intelligence, and afterwards we realized there's actually still more left to it. The thing that's sort of underrated is not even agency per se, although that's a part of it. I think the thing that's underrated is we humans have this global hive mind where the reason we can make iPhones and we can make buildings and whatever is not just intelligence and also not just agency. It's the fact that There's so much specialization. There's so much capital deepening. People are just like doing things, trying different ideas. AIs need to be smarter in order to do that. They need to have more agency in order to do that. But once they can, if you have millions of AIs running around trying different things, that's when we get the real acceleration, and you'll feel it in your blood.
When you say like millions of AIs, you've said that you think there will be billions of AIs running around. Like, what does that actually mean? Like, how can we quantize? Are we just talking like ChatGPT DAUs? Are we talking about individual threads? Because you can inference multiple threads on a single chip.
That's right.
Like how are you thinking it when you think it sounds more concrete when you say there will be billions of AIs, but is that really just like there will be a hive mind that is equivalent to billions of people? Are we talking about like one, or maybe each model is like one entity, but then there's sub threads? How do you think about like that concept of like billions of AIs?
Honestly, I don't think anybody knows. I think it'll just like depend on how the tech tree shapes out.
Sure.
I have heard like these wild ideas in some of these interviews where one person at Jay Coacher mentioned this idea of the blob. And the blob is right now, it's really hard for, if you have an institution or organization company, it's really hard for the person at the center to have that much awareness of what's happening in the company to control it to any great extent. Xi Jinping has the same 10 to the 15 flops in his brain as any other Chinese person or any other person in general.
Yeah.
And in the future, you can imagine that, look, the thing at the center just has way more compute, and it's not clear whether you think about it as like more copies of AI Xi Jinping or AI Sundar Pichai or something. Yeah. But you could just have this like huge blob that's constantly you're it's like learning more things. It's like writing every single press release the company releases. It's reading every single pull request. It's answering every single customer response. I don't know if that at all helped answer the question.
Yeah, it's a very weird question of like how this will actually play out. Do we need to recreate the concept of like an individual brain and then copy paste it a billion times, or do we just need one really big brain? It's unclear to me. I don't know. Jordy, what do you got?
How did you feel on Wednesday? This sort of like Ghibli moment. A lot of people were saying, "Oh, I can't even go on X. It's just all slop." And my takeaway was, this is not slop. This is beautiful. This is like actually the most beautiful the timeline has ever looked. And the most powerful thing about that moment, it was the first time that I felt that the entire world could get consistently perfect outputs without any sort of like prompt engineering, and basically just one-shotting these outputs in this sort of very scaled way. Are you so to me, I get very excited about it because it's like having any human be able to create beautiful images out of text is fantastic. Yes. And I think we should be excited about that. But how did you kind of react to some people saying like, oh, this is bad, or like, I'm going to log off forever, right? You saw people that were just like, okay, like I'm going to delete my account and just leave X now. It's over.
How many times have those people said that?
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's a very zero. Some people were saying things like, "Oh, you're like eating up the, like this, fossil fuel, which is like our affection for Ghibli somehow by making these things." I think it's just a very zero-sum view of the world where there can be a limited amount of beauty, there can be a limited amount of joy. I just don't think that. And can I be honest? Like the thing I was really feeling when all these Ghibli images were coming out, I became more convinced of our glorious transhumanist future, where like, look, you're getting a glimpse just from these like early images of how cool and beautiful the things AI makes or helps us make will be. Just imagine this scaled up like 100x, 1000x, integrated into all our senses, maybe even into our minds, integrated into the way we relate with the people we care about, and so forth. I'm just like, the future could be really beautiful.
I agree.
Yeah, I'm wearing like a VR goggles and it's making everyone beautiful. It's really rose-colored glasses, right?
Yeah. To begin with.
Yeah.
How do you feel? So Manus AI is apparently doing like a roadshow in the United States right now, sort of raising from American VCs potentially. I saw some people pushing back on the timeline saying like, bad luck to any American VC that does that. How do you feel, and the criticism would be like, we're in this sort of AI, Cold War, American, venture capital dollars shouldn't be sort of funding companies that are potentially competing with US AI labs or application layer companies. What's your sort of broad take on this sort of like cross-border investment in AI.
Yeah, I was in China a few months earlier, and it was really striking to me how dismayed the venture capital system there felt and the tech ecosystem generally. Because after the 2021 crackdowns, people are just like really pulled back. And it sounds like after the DeepSeek moment, that sort of changed, at least in the AI, because now the state, the city funds and whatever are more willing to pitch in. Um, yeah, and how should people react to this? I'm of two minds because one, I do believe that there could be an intelligence explosion, and you really want to be ahead of that, and you don't want to help them get ahead on that. So I think like the export controls and whatever are wise. As for just Mana seems like in the middle ground here, where I wouldn't want to just generally try to harm China by tariffing batteries or cars or something. Um, this is an application of AI, and it's complementary to American AI Foundation Labs because they're using the Claude model, right? So,
Yeah.
I honestly I don't have a strong thing. What do you guys think?
I don't. I'm exactly in the same position as you. I don't have if American, I did find it a little bit weird that some American venture capitalists were just like cheering on DeepSeek, just like, blanket statement, open source is good. This is good, when it felt like the way the launch was like rolled out and announced was done in a way to potentially sort of harm American financial markets. But
I mean, my take has been that just on a pure investment finance level, like investing in a Chinese company just can be difficult to get your money back at a certain point because the money just gets kind of stranded there. And then depending on who's in charge of America at the time, it could be very onerous to bring that money back. But I want to stay on China real quick. I thought, fantastic piece. I don't even know what you call it, video essay, but one of the things that really stuck out to me as a creator like yourself was the lack of Chinese Joe Rogan, basically. And I was wondering, like, have you thought about that more? Have you unpacked that more? Like, you would almost expect that even if all the crazy censorship is true, why is there no power law winner and there's a Joe Rogan who just spouts propaganda constantly? Like, what is going on that's driving the lack of these like long tail, like, world, like country renowned, country famous people?
Yeah, I feel like you guys might actually have a good perspective on this because somebody might have said, why doesn't tech have their like Joe Rogan equivalent? And you guys started your podcast network. And I think somebody could have said before you guys started your podcast network, why doesn't something like this exist already? I honestly, I don't speak Chinese, and I don't. This is just secondhand stuff I heard in China. I feel like reluctant to make grand conclusions about Chinese culture based on like, why don't they have a Joe Rogan? And it's because like this is Chinese culture is like this or something.
Yeah.
The sense I got was that they are more concerned, like whether it's young people or just whatever people want to consume, is often more focused on practical matters. And if you listen to Joe Rogan, it's very much like, let's just shoot the shit about whatever. I get the sense that it's like that is just not that interesting,
like
to at least to the people I met.
Yeah, it's less practical stuff. I wonder if there's also an effect where just some of the first social networks probably accelerated more quickly to these highly diffuse algorithmic driven TikTok feeds that allow for smaller micro celebrities essentially. Whereas in America, we've been building up this celebrity culture for so long that we have this more of a power law dynamic. I don't know. I don't really have a thesis on it. That's super built out, but it is fascinating.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. Have you been there?
I was there once on a layover, but Jordy did live there for a while.
Oh, really?
In 2016, I worked at I went to Fudan, which is like...
It was a little hedge fund called High Flyer.
Yeah, no big deal. No, I just studied abroad there. So I was there for a semester and I worked out of China Accelerator, which is like a startup accelerator. So a very, very interesting experience that I don't...
I mean, the scale is crazy. I was in Guangzhou even just for a day, and the scale of the buildings there, it really is remarkable. Like, you need to see it in person because the pictures kind of compress everything. You don't really understand until you're there.
The one thing that I found that was weirdly fascinating is I for some reason, I don't know if it was the iPhone camera at that time, but I found it very difficult to get high quality images because it was so polluted that like
Oh,
something
interesting.
about like your own eyes would be able to kind of like,
Huh.
I don't know,
Increase the
is ignore it,
contrast,
but I would
more or
take a
less.
picture and I'm like, that's not what it looks like.
Oh, weird.
And I realized over time that it was just like certain areas were so heavily polluted that
Interesting.
the iPhone camera would just kind of bug out. But
It's like your nightmare.
I had a question for you. Something from this week that I thought was funny was that sort of like we were all kind of like holding our breath for the next like ChatGPT moment, and then it was also ChatGPT with their image generation product. Do you think we should be holding our breath for sort of another company to sort of experience this sort of moment like that, where it's just full, complete takeover of the mind share, right? Because mind share is just so important right now. The sort of benchmarks come out and everybody in our corner of the internet is like hyper fixated on it. But the average consumer, one of the things I thought was fascinating is, John and I had a couple Ghibli posts each that sort of broke containment, and a lot of people were quoting it and saying, all right, like, tell me what this app is, everybody. Like, what's the joke? Like, they just still didn't know like ChatGPT or anything like that. But I think it would be amazing for the industry if another company could have, a moment that big. Do you see something like that happening, this year? Or have we sort of reached
like even
level?
like the agent stuff, like flight booking, you could see that like there's some application that would go real broad. Or is there any like next milestone that you're waiting for?
If somebody did get a reliable agent to work, I think that would just be like that would have a similar break the internet in a way that you personally could use, and you could just like log in and I think it'll probably be one of the foundation lab companies. People have been for years trying to build agents, and they just haven't worked, and it makes me think that that's a fundamental limitation of the current models, and so it'll just be the company that is building a future model that is geared towards computer use and so forth. That is what I'd expect it to be. I mean, I was thinking the other day, remember when Sam got fired and people were posting on Twitter, oh, there's something, what did Ilya see? There's this Q-star.
Q-star,
yeah. Yeah. I don't think that's why he got fired.
Yep.
But it is notable that in retrospect, if you were following the Q-star rumors, you actually would have been in a good position to anticipate that there would be this like reasoning breakthrough. That's kind of what they were talking about at the time.
Yep.
Similarly, GPT 4.5 and Grok 3 being not that much better. If you were following Twitter and 6 months ago, you would have seen, pre-training might plateau, but we'll have to go with inference scaling or something.
Yep.
So maybe my update has been that you can sort of know what's going to happen. I mean, I remember at the time I was just like, these idiots on Twitter are just like, they don't know what they're talking about. They're just like a rumor mill. And in retrospect, I'm like, kind of like, I mean, you like take it with a grain of salt, but they kind of had the big picture. There's like no secrets.
Yeah, there was always this funny dynamic where people were criticizing Sam for launching ChatGPT without telling the board, but then at the same time, people were criticizing Sam for like being non-technical and not driving the product forward. And I was like, no matter what you think of Sam, like those two things cannot be true simultaneously. Like you have to pick a side here. You can't criticize him for both like not innovating and also innovating too fast. But anyway, I want to talk about like a flip side of the P-Doom argument that I've been kicking around. Basically, like we've seen these like accelerating trends before. Nuclear energy too cheap to meter has been talked about before, and we have hit stagnation. Like it is possible that just something can break in our society and all these different economic and political forces can align to just say, hey, you know what? Nuclear energy is not going to double every couple of years. And it didn't. And I'm wondering, like, what is your P stagnation? Like, just your probability that something happens. Maybe people freak out. Maybe there's just, one world government or something. But we actually see AI stall for a significant amount of time, like 50 years. There's no intelligence explosion purely for stagnation reasons. Do you think that's a possibility?
Like 10, 20%.
Oh.
I think there is a dynamic I talked about earlier where in the past, we have underestimated how much it takes to make a coherent intelligence that has agency and so forth, right? That could be part of it. Another is that there is no intelligence explosion. So, sorry, I mean, the most important thing here is, look, we can keep increasing compute that we're putting into these systems for maybe the next 5-10 years, because compute is just growing at this ridiculous rate, where in 3 years, we're going to have 10x the amount of global AI compute that we have right now. But at some point, right now, we're spending 2% of GDP on compute. and data centers and stuff like that. You can't just keep like 10xing that forever.
Yep.
So if somehow this whole deep learning paradigm is wrong and we just like totally miss the boat somehow, then I can see it happening. That's I give it a 10, 20%. Otherwise, if we do get AGI, I'm of the opinion that we're not, it would just be so hard to contain it. Like, it's an incredibly powerful technology. Even if there's no intelligence explosion, even if it doesn't help you make an ASI or something, just AGI alone is like, would just make the economy explode and all kinds of crazy shit.
I mean, on the like, there's a little bit of a force of deceleration, like the GDP question, but also just, I've had this idea that like, no matter how intelligent you are, you can't break the laws of physics. At a certain point, you need to like get the sand out of the ground and turn it into silicon. And like at a certain point, just moving the sand around fast enough, even at light speed, you're not 10xing every 2 years. And so it feels like there could be a slowing down, even as we're having the robots do basically everything. It's like the robots are still maxed out by physics. I don't know.
I was thinking about this morning, actually. And the intuition I was thinking about is, so since 1750s, we've had 2% economic growth in the world. Before that, it was like a tenth of that, right? 0.2%. If you were around in the 1500s or 1000 and somebody said there'd be like 2% growth, I think you might, given your reference class, have been like, look, it just takes a long time to learn how to artificially select crops and how to build like new structures and aqueducts and whatever. It just that is a process that takes a while. So why do you think you're just going to be going through like increasing that 2-3% a year? And in retrospect, it is like a really weird. You look at the last 100 years of history. We're discovering all these new things in physics and chemistry and so forth. The last 50 years, we start with the transistor, and now we're talking on this magical screen. And that was just like, physics didn't bottleneck that. I think like you get another 10x, and I don't see any in principle reason why at the next 10x of physics is like, just would not allow the robots to move fast enough.
So, yeah, I mean, certainly on the GDP question, I think the energy question's like maybe a little bit murkier, but then there's probably other ways to optimize and still get those GDP lifts, even with energy growing at like a more reasonable, less explosive rate. So I think I agree with you there.
I'm sure you've talked about this in other interviews and with some of the individuals that are sort of leading initiatives at these companies. But what's your sort of broad take on Apple's position and how they've been approaching everything in AI? You know, it's sort of like I've seen, they've sort of led with like Genmoji almost as much as they've led with like, everything, all the potential of what you would want out of sort of AI assistant. But how do you think these, companies like Apple and Google sort of like figure out product development and like proper distribution of these products? Because I feel like that's been the big critique. It's just like they have every possible advantage, such talented, team members, and it has to be so frustrating.
And it should be a sustaining advantage or sustaining innovation. If you're looking at the innovator's dilemma framework, and yet it feels like it might wind up being disruptive. I don't know.
Yeah. They're not AGI filled enough, like if you treat it like another feature, well, I mean, even if you treat it like another feature, it's like mysterious why Siri doesn't work on my phone, but it's like more people basically. And if you take that seriously, you're not just going to be like, oh, and the 25th department in our complex is about making Siri better at speaking or something. No, it's like, this is the future.
Yeah.
And then that then becomes like the Gigabull case for safe superintelligence, meaning like none of the features or like consumer applications really matter at all today, and you shouldn't even release them, and you should just sort of accelerate towards the end goal that enables all the other goals.
That's an interesting point. I think maybe somewhere in between, where like if you didn't release ChatGPT, you wouldn't have been able to just like know that this is a feature people really wanted and that they would get a lot of use of as compared to the other things people were using GPT 3.5 to do. And I wonder if other things other like features of AGI will be similar, where if you don't if you don't deploy it to a bunch of engineers on Cursor, you just like won't know what it would actually make something a good coding bot. The counter argument to this, and I think what the SSI people would say, is that they actually are deploying, but they're deploying towards the one thing they care about, which is accelerating AI research, and they don't need to do that externally. They can just do that internally. And so the basic question is, can you get this like closed loop where you build the AIs which are helping you accelerate AI research, super intelligence? I'm like 50-50 on that question. But that other 50% is like a big deal.
Yeah, you mentioned AGI pilled. Is there a difference between AGI pilled and ASI pilled, and why do OpenAI co-founders seem incapable of starting anything but a foundation model company?
Yeah.
I always wondered, like, I just want one of them to be like, yeah, actually, I'm starting a travel company. But it seems to be
people
like
are going to be traveling a lot after their jobs are gone.
They only know one thing. Like, they're all one-trick ponies. I mean, I love them all, but like, it's just funny that none of them started anything else.
It's the only thing that matters, maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you're right. I think some people, I wouldn't even put it as ASI, because even if you don't believe in this like godlike intelligence that's going to control the world, I'm not sure I believe it either. I think there's AGI pilled and there's like transformative AI pilled, where you say, look, even if they're just like humans, if they have the advantages that AIs will just intrinsically have because of the fact that they're digital, which is the fact that they can be copied with all of their brain, all of their knowledge, right? So think of the most skilled engineer in your company, like Jeff Dean or Elias Escobar. You can like copy that person with all their tacit knowledge and everything. You can merge different copies. You can scale and distill AGIs. Those advantages alone, and the fact that there will be billions of copies as we increase the amount of compute in the world, that alone is enough for transformation in the sense of going from, like what we were like before the Industrial Revolution to the Industrial Revolution pace of growth. And so I think somebody can be AGI pilled in the sense they say like, yeah, I expect like human level intelligence to emerge in the next 10 years, but they still don't take that seriously as in like, okay, well, what does that imply about what is happening through the economy? Does that just mean like, oh, you've got a smart personal assistant, or does it mean like, no, we're in a very different growth regime?
Last question.
Two last questions, I guess.
Go for it.
One question. So, are there any people in the book that you feel like, in the fullness of time, are sort of very underhyped or not getting enough attention? People that are unsung heroes that maybe don't post a lot on X today, but when we look back, 15 years from now, we'll be like,
good question.
Those were the people that were doing. Because there's this weird phenomena right now where it's like if you're just loud on the internet, like you just like you suck mind share and attention, and maybe there's somebody like a building over that's doing more impactful work or really at the forefront that isn't posting at all because they're actually onto something.
That's a really good question. I think a lot of the people I've interviewed have subsequently, or at the same time, like are well known, right? So even if you're not a lab CEO, so if you're like a Leopold or you're a Schulte or a Trenton, people know who you are on Twitter as well. The person who I think might be underrated still is an interview I did that we only released in the book. So we have two interviews that we kept for the book. One of them is Ajaya Kotra, and she is somebody who has been doing these really interesting, like since the 2010s, these really interesting analyses of how much compute did evolution spend in total in order to like over the billions of years evolution has been going, like how do we model that as a computational like pathfinding exercise, and using that as an upper bound on how long it will take to build AGI, and then like how much compute does the human brain use, how much like time do we spend learning as kids, and how much compute is that in total compared to how long it takes to train these models. What does that teach us about how much better these models could get given this overhang? That has informed, I think, a lot of. Oh shit! Sorry, this is the wrong answer. Although Ajaya is excellent, and she's also underrated. The one who's like also super underrated is Carl Schulman.
Okay.
And I think I don't know if this name rings a bell to you. Yeah. This man is like, you would not believe the amount of ideas that are out there in the AI ecosystem, from like the software-only singularity, basically the intelligence explosion kind of stuff, to these like transformative AI and modeling out the economics of this new growth regime, to like so much more. It's like this one guy, it all came from him. He doesn't like to write that much, so he like tells other people his ideas. I had him on my podcast and we put his stuff in there. And he just has all these galaxy brain takes. Like one of them was, he looked at the research on what changed between chimpanzee brains and human brains, and he's like, oh, there's like there's a bunch of structural similarities. It's just that the human brain is bigger. So this lends credence to the scaling hypothesis.
I love
All
that.
kinds of galaxy brain
Crazy.
stuff.
That's amazing.
I have one more
Yeah,
question,
you
and
should.
then we'll let you go. By the way, X is down. I think you broke it, or we broke it together.
We broke it.
But
They need to
yeah,
scale.
we're still live
It's a
on
scaling
YouTube.
era.
Yeah.
But how do you think about more on like the business side? Because I think everybody's been fascinated with your journey. When you started your podcast, everybody would have said like, there's enough podcasts. Like we just don't need more of them. That clearly is not true. There's plenty of white space, and your growth is proof of that. But how do you think about value capture and what you're doing? Because I'm sure you've had people come to you and say like, hey, look, like, just come keep doing the show, but we're going to give you $50 million of sort of like shares, and you don't have to
Nobody's come to me with that.
well, they should, I
Not
think.
yet.
But yeah, like how do you think about kind of, I think there's this general fear in the tech community right now where it's like, this is the last 2 to 3 years where you can like, accumulate wealth and then like it's over. And I don't believe that that's true, but how do you sort of balance like, you're doing something you love all day long, which is just like talking to interesting people and like thinking about the future and humanity's potential and technology and all this stuff. But how do you balance all of that fear and wanting to capture value from your work, but also wanting to not be conflicted, right? And being able to just be sort of this independent actor.
Yep. I actually am very curious about the answer for you guys, because even though you're the sort of the network you're starting now, it started with a much bigger bang than my podcast are started out with. So I assume you actually got a bunch of these kinds of offers, right? As you're like, oh, this is like new and exciting.
Well, yeah, we care a lot about being like Switzerland, but specifically from like the investor side, right? Like long term, we want to have any sort of investor be able to come on the show and talk about what they're doing.
That's right.
And I would imagine the same thing for you. Like you don't want to be like so tied in or have to one foundation model company that you can't talk about the incredible things that someone else is doing, right?
Yeah. I have had like different podcast networks or whatever reach out to me in the past, and I've seriously considered them. In one case, I was like close to saying yes. And in retrospect, it was like, this was many, many years ago before like the podcast had grown that much at all. And it was like, we'll give you, we'll edit the show for you and we'll produce it for you. And all we ask is 50% of the revenue you earn through the future.
And
you're 50% of your lifetime earnings.
50-50.
Yeah. But I had a couple of friends who they're like, dude, it's like working, just do it yourself.
Yeah.
And I'm glad. Because also another thing that might have influenced your decision as well is talent is so key.
Yeah.
Talent in the sense of, I think it really matters to have one, or in this case, two, in your case, two people who are like, we care, this is our vision, and we are going to instill it, rather than this is an institution where I'm the face of it. But secondly, what I was going for is like talent as your editors, your other people on your team. For me, I've just been super delighted with the people I get to work with there, and it just like the care and attention to detail they have just would not be replicated with, here's a team of editors at this podcast network. It's
Totally.
like, instead of the people I've sought out and I love working with, and I give them detailed feedback and they give me detailed feedback, and that's what also what makes it special.
Yeah.
On to the specifics around, do you think the general techno-capitalist fear of, basically like, I think a lot of, 22-year-olds right now are coming in to their sort of careers and they're saying like, well, everybody's going to be paper clipped in a few years. Like you've got to sort of like create value and capture it now so that you're okay in this sort of like AGI future. I do feel like that's maybe sort of common fear throughout history, right? Where there's like, people have this sort of pending sense of doom sometimes, but do you think that's like, what would you say to somebody that had that sense?
I think the way to model out the next few years from a career trajectory is you'll just have 100x to leverage, but you want to be in a position where you can use that leverage. There's a common thing, and I'm sure you experience this now as well, is that as you advance in your career, before you're like, I've got a bunch of time, but I don't know what to work on. And after you're further along, you're like, I have no time, but there's like 1,000 different ideas I have for things that would be super valuable or I think would go really well or something. So I think what you should do is just get to a point where in whatever you think is interesting or care about, you're at the frontier and can see what the problem space actually looks like. If you care about AI, I would really recommend moving to SF and then just start working on problems and use the leverage that AI gives you. And if you end up getting paper clipped, it's like, look, what's the point of like you personally? What's the point of that you like not doing anything, worrying about that? In the 80% of worlds or 90% of worlds where we don't get paper clipped, you'll get to say you worked on something really cool at a time that was really important in the history of humanity.
That's great.
Well said.
Thanks for coming on. This is fantastic.
This is fun, guys.
We got to have you back.
Yeah.
This is really, really awesome.
Let's make it a regular thing.
I enjoyed
And
this.
super bullish around you guys. I mean, like,
thank you so much.
You were like, well, your previous thing is a couple of months in, but this is like a couple of weeks in, and you're already killing it. That's awesome.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you coming on.
And for the record, we're not building a network.
Yeah,
it's
actually a head fake.
It's a head fake.
It's just a show.
No, it's just a show forever.
That's right.
It's a show with
we'll
a funny
never
name.
we'll never come to you and say give us half for editing. You
can't.
And
You want at least 75%.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
Great having you on.
Great having you on, Dwarkesh.
I'm
This is
excited to
fantastic.
get everybody to get access to the book.
Yeah, go get the book. I printed it out.
We have
but
a
you can buy
manuscript.
the actual thing.
Yeah.
So
Thank you
go
for
get
doing
it.
that.
Stripe Press. The
Yeah,
scaling
awesome.
era is here.
Cheers.
Thank you guys so
Cheers.
much for having me on.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.